HDR, or high dynamic range, can make photos look fantastic or horrible. After watching this video, your HDR photos will start to look fantastic. In an HDR photo, you go out to a scene and take 3 different exposures of the same scene and blend them together in software to get the full dynamic range of everything in that scene. We'll begin this video by showing how to set up bracketing on a Nikon and a Canon. We'll go out to a site and take an HDR photo and then process them in Photomatix and Photoshop. To set up bracketing on a Canon, first make sure you're not in auto mode. You can be in manual, aperture value, time value, or program. Then hold down the drive button and turn the dial until you see the icon with multiple squares. Go to the back of the camera, click on Menu. It's already in Exposure Compensation, AEB, which stands for Auto Exposure Bracketing. Click on Set, and then turn the dial to make the spread for each shot. We're going to spread these photos apart by 1 stop. We'll put each mark under the one for underexposed. It'll take a regular exposed and then a 1-stop overexposed photo. Now we're ready to go. Now let's demonstrate how to set up bracketing on a Nikon. The Nikon has a separate bracket button here on the left side labeled BKT. Hold that button down, turn the dial till it says 3F, standing for 3 frames. Make sure you're not in auto mode on the upper dial, and it helps to move the lower dial to CH, which stands for continuous high speed. Let's demonstrate how that works. We'll squeeze the shutter and the Nikon will fire off 3 quick shots.
So here we are at the Lyndhurst Car Show where we're going to take an HDR. Before you get started, the most important thing is to make sure you have a good composition. We set up bracketing on the Nikon, and now we're going to take a picture of these cars, bring it into Photoshop and Photomatix and see what we get. Let's take a look. We took 3 shots for an HDR, and now we'll process it and see how it looks.
Now that we're back from the car show, let's take our bracketed shots and drop them into Photomatix. We shot 3 bracketed shots, but most SLRs give you the option to shoot more than 3 bracketed. You could shoot 5, 7, 9, or more. And always try and shoot raw when you get the opportunity. It gives you more control over your files, and it also gives you more information to work with. We'll select these 3 files and drop them right onto Photomatix. The first window that comes up asks to merge for HDR processing. We'll click OK. It shows the 3 files we're working with. We're not going to check off Show 32-bit Unprocessed Image, so we'll just click OK. In this panel, it's important to have Align Source Images checked off because we did shoot handheld, and this will correct any variance between the 3 photos. We'll leave checked off Include Perspective Correction. We're not going to show options to remove ghosts. We will reduce noise on underexposed images. And we will check off Reduce Chromatic Aberration. We're not going to change the white balance, but we will change color primaries based on, and we'll go to Pro Photo RGB. This should give us better quality. Now let's check off Align and Merge to HDR. Photomatix keeps you updated as to what it's doing with the files. It shows you which files it's working with. This is the Nikon nomenclature, DSC_6430, and it shows you it's working with file 30, 31, and 32. It'll tell you what process it's doing here and keep you updated as it continues. Now our 3 files are merged into one and we can begin processing. But there's a couple of tenets you must keep in mind. The best HDR photo is a photo that looks like it wasn't processed with HDR software. You want to make sure that you don't over-process your photos. So let's review the panels that we have. On the left side are all the sliders to adjust the photo. Of course, the photo is in the middle, and you can also change the size of how it appears. We'll click on Fit to use every inch of the screen. And here are all the presets down the right side, and we'll review those in a moment. Before we begin, let's go to the View menu and change some preferences. The most important one is when adjusting preview, refresh continuously as slider moves, because you want the ability to move the slider while staring at the photo to see the changes. That's all the changes we'll make for now. We'll close the preference panel, and now we'll begin. The first slider is strength, and it happens to be up all the way. But you could see it looks very overprocessed, but that's because Painterly 2 is selected. Let's begin with the default preset. It looks a little flat. So beginning with the sliders on the left side, let's take a look at strength. We'll start to move it to the right, and it's making the colors a little richer. We'll leave it right there for now. This could use more color saturation. We'll move that up a little bit, see how the photo looks. Now we'll move to tone compression. We're in Photomatix Pro 5. Under version 4, this used to be called luminosity, and this affects the light and dark tones. Let's move it off to the left. That's pretty dramatic, but not the effect we're looking for. We'll back it up a little bit. Right now the photo looks a little dark, so we'll move tone compression up again. That still looks a little bleached. We'll back it off. And now we'll move down to detail contrast. It's right now at 0.0. Let's move it up a little bit and see how it affects the photo. That's looking a little better, and it doesn't look overprocessed. Now let's take a look at lighting adjustment. You also can check off this box, and it gives you 5 adjustments here. You could choose natural, and that's a better look. And we can go through all of them, but let's click right down to Surreal Plus and see what it does to the photo. And this is what we referred to in the beginning of the video about a horrible photo. You see ghosting all around the edges, the colors look washed out, and it just looks overprocessed. Let's uncheck lighting effects. Our photo is looking pretty good. Let's click on Show More Options. You have smooth highlights. Let's bring that up from 0 and see how it affects the photo. That's looking pretty good. We'll move the white point a little bit, and now we'll move the black point and see how it affects the photo. I'm going to leave the gamma at 1 and temperature at 0.0. It's always important to take a look at your histogram and see how it's laid out. And now let's go back to the adjustments and look at Show Advanced Options. We have macro smoothing. Let me scroll down. And let's bring that up a little bit and see how it affects it. We could back that off. We have saturation highlights, and I think we're going to bring that up a little bit. And we have saturation shadows. We can bring that up a pinch. Keep in mind, because every photo is different, there is no best way to make these adjustments. We have shadow smoothness. We'll bring that up. See how it looks. That's really not causing too much of a dramatic difference. We'll bring that back down. Now let's look at shadows clipping. We'll bring that up halfway. At this point we can apply the changes we made, but I kind of like these settings, so I'm going to save them as a preset. Click on Save Preset. This window pops up. We'll call it Cars. Save it to the desktop and click Save. Now we'll apply those settings to this photo and see how it looks. Then we'll come back in and review the other presets. Click on Apply. Here's our final image. It looks pretty good. There's no ghosting. It doesn't look overprocessed. The colors look very rich. And you also have the opportunity to do more processing at this stage. We can up the contrast. You could play with the color. And you can also do sharpening. But we can also bring this into Photoshop and do those adjustments there. Let's go to File. We'll save image as. And I like to save it as a TIFF 16-bit, which will give us the most data. We'll click on the desktop. The file name will be DSC 64301 2 and 3 tonemapped.tiff. We'll click Save. Now that that file is saved to the desktop, let's load those 3 bracketed shots again in a different manner and choose a different preset and see what else we could do with this photo. We'll click on Load Bracketed Shots, Browse. It shows the car show folder with the 3 files. We'll highlight the files, click Open. We'll click OK. We'll leave all the adjustments as we did before. Click on Align and Merge to HDR. Let's look at some of the presets. We started out with Default. We'll go to Balanced, and that looks a little washed out. Let's click on Photographic. That's a little bit more realistic, but we lost some detail in the shadows. We could bring up Brightness, and that's starting to look a little better. Now let's get into some of the heavier ones. We'll start on Painterly, and that changed the color of the vet from white to beige. Let's click on Painterly 2, and that definitely has an overprocessed look. Let's scroll down. Let's jump up to Painterly 5. That's not as bad, but still looks over-processed. We'll click on Vibrant, and that looks a little over-processed, but we could probably tone it down with the sliders here on the left. Let's jump over to some of the black and white HDR presets. Let's click on Black and White Photographic. We lost a lot of detail in the shadows. Let's jump up to Monochrome. That gives it some intensity. Monochrome 2. It's given the car a nice shine, but the sky looks a little strange. We'll click on Monochrome 3. That looks a little washed out. We'll click on Black and White Artistic. And that definitely looks over-processed. And we'll click on Black and White Natural. That doesn't look over-processed, and we could probably bring back a lot of the excitement to the photo with the sliders. Now let's go back out to the desktop and take our processed HDR photo and drop it in Photoshop. Here's our file. We'll drop it in Photoshop CS6. There's a couple of adjustments that we can make, but one of the most powerful things that you could do is bring back up those 3 bracketed shots and take parts of any one of those shots and patch it in. Right now the sky looks pretty good, but a lot of times the sky becomes distorted or too dark or too blown out. And you could take the medium shot from the 3 bracketed shots and paste in that sky. The first thing I'm going to do here is crop. There's a little bit of a person sticking out. We'll grab the crop tool, bring the right side in a little bit, click enter on the keyboard, and now let's get rid of that pole in the background. We'll select it. We'll go up to the edit menu, select fill, and use content aware fill. Click OK, and it even filled in the phone lines. That concludes this tutorial. Look for other tutorials on long exposure, macro, and in-depth Photoshop tutorials on eugenelagana.com.